Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2637 of The Tom Woods Show. And today I'm delighted to share with you my recent appearance on the Liam McCollum Show. And we talked about all kinds of interesting things. You get the gist of it from the episode title here, but I am certain you're going to enjoy it. And do check out the Liam McCollum Show. Liam's a great guy. He's one of our, I hate calling people up-and-comers because it sounds patronizing. I don't mean it that way at all. He's a really, really solid guy, and I know you're going to like him. So enjoy.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for being here. Anyone who watched my last episode with Ron Paul will have already heard this story, but the reason I'm a libertarian is in large part because of you. In 2017, 2018, my senior year of high school, I was taking an honors civics class with a guy by the name of Lee Deming. And one day he was giving a talk in class about Obamacare, and he said something critical about it. And at the time, I was just a mainline Republican kind of thinking person. I supported Trump. I actually went to a school costume contest wearing a Trump mask, and I won. So I go up to him and I just asked him, I'm like, do you know Ben Shapiro, and what are your thoughts about him? And he kind of nods and smirks, and he goes, yeah, I like Ben, but you should check out Tom Woods. And this was in public school, by the way. And he actually had a Ron Paul portrait in his classroom. One day he had a photo of Lincoln that he put up and an arrow on the whiteboard, and it said "worst president ever?" ? And he didn't acknowledge it in the class. He just had it up there to see if any student would bring it up to him. But after that, I listened to your episodes almost every day for years after that, and the rest is history. So I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Lee Deming, for that that particular boost. And of course, you've been a great asset to have. So this all worked out great.
Well, thank you. But I wanted to bring you on because you had recently given a talk at a Ron Paul Institute event titled "The Ron Paulian Roots of MAGA and What It Still Has to Learn." And you make a really convincing case almost that, with the two Ron Paul campaigns in 2008 and 2012, there was a lot of energy. The Ron Paul revolution was sparked. And then, there was this Tea Party movement that kind of died off afterward. And the Obama administration kind of took all the winds out of the sails. And then when Trump reemerged, all of this populist energy came back behind him. And I want you to make the case, what was it about Ron Paul that sparked this populist energy? And what roots do we see in the MAGA movement?
Well, some of them are quite general and others are more specific. So let's start with the general. Obviously, one thing that the two movements share in common is anti-establishment, the anti-establishment posture that they take. Now, some people have claimed that Trump's a phony and he's not really anti-establishment. Okay, I don't really want to argue that because I think the kinds of people he appoints, they're not all people I would appoint, but nobody else was going to put Jay Bhattacharya in at NIH, or RFK at HHS and so on, and Tulsi Gabbard, and I know they all have their problems, but I also recognize that I live in an imperfect world and I'm not going to get everything I want. I share this world with billions of people who see things 180 degrees differently from how I see them. So when I get anything at all, I'm pleased instead of demanding to know why I didn't get 100% of what I want. I want to get something. And, with an anti-establishment campaign, there's a chance I might get something because there's a chance that dissident voices might actually get heard for a change. So Ron Paul made clear that there was something about the Republican Party itself that was deeply rotten. And that was, of course, going to be the message of Donald Trump, that these people are all talk, they don't do anything. And more than that, I think the message that came through was, if you vote for a Mitt Romney, you're voting for somebody whose whole career has been a series of knives in your back. If that's what you want, a lot of those are on offer. But what if we try something different? And that was what Dr. Paul was talking about. Now, there is an example of, I think the example we all know the best of Dr. Paul standing out from all the other Republicans and implicitly making clear that there's something wrong with all those other Republicans was, of course, that moment in 2007 when he confronted Rudy Giuliani about 9/11. But a much less well-known example, and yet should be recalled as vividly, occurred in late January 2008. The candidates were now only four: Romney, McCain, Huckabee, and Ron Paul. So most of the debate time went to McCain and Romney, which meant the debate was a complete waste of time. And they spent an inordinate amount of time arguing about minutia surrounding Iraq and force levels and who would send troops where at what time. And it was an inane argument about nothing, because they both basically favored the same policy. It was just, they were just arguing about the trimmings. So they finally let Ron Paul speak, and he said, well, the whole thing seems silly to me because they're just arguing minutia about a policy they both agree on. We should be arguing the big issues of foreign policy, namely, should we have a global empire and try and be the policeman of the world, or should we defend only this country? Well, that was the question that should be asked. Now, there's nothing going on in the idiotic, inane debate between Romney and McCain that mattered at all to anybody. And yet, I remember this because I watched it after the debate was over. You would think if we lived in a normal country, the media would say, well, Ron Paul really laid bare just how phony the debate really was, didn't he? No, they didn't even mention that. They said, well, we had some real fireworks between McCain and Romney, fireworks that amounted to nothing. So that's something you walk away from the Ron Paul campaign remembering, that he stood out from these people. He was very different. He suggested that none of them live up to principles they at least pretend to stand for. So that was one thing, was that difference between him and them. Of course, the anti-war position is a very significant difference between him and them. His view on the Federal Reserve was a very significant difference. They're not even talking about these things. He was not afraid to just say, nope, sorry, they're wrong, and we should do the opposite of what these people are saying. So that is going to, even if everybody didn't immediately go for that, he paves the way for somebody else to come along and build on that, because people have heard it before. When Trump comes along and says that Jeb Bush is a waste of space, the way for that has been paved now. This isn't some radical thing out of left field that everybody has to imbibe and assimilate. They're already familiar with this, and they're already familiar also with what Dr. Paul did. I think was also a very significant thing. This is more specific with the health freedom movement. The health freedom movement, or let's say dissident voices in health, had not typically been associated with the Republican Party, but they did latch on to Dr. Paul because he, being a libertarian, was very interested in a lot of the things that they were interested in. And his view was that the way big pharma conducts itself vis-a-vis government is not the way an institution innocently pursuing the public good behaves. So something is fishy about this. And they agreed with that. And a lot of them latched on to him, even though they would not normally have wanted to vote for a Republican. So again, and I think that persisted. And with regard to health, who were, in my opinion, the two best public officials on COVID? Well, Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. Where'd they come from? They both came out of the Ron Paul revolution. So when we have a Republican who professes to be a dissident and who says we need to listen to dissident voices on health, well, again, the groundwork for that, the scaffolding, the intellectual scaffolding for that had already been built by the Ron Paul revolution. So there's the whole variety of ways, but he built something. He showed that you could succeed in politics without consulting focus groups for your every word and phrase. You could just say what you thought and let the chips fall where they may. And it's true, no, he didn't win, but he went from zero name recognition to a nationally known figure. And he did that in a completely unconventional way by completely ignoring political consultants, not doing things the way that you're supposed to do them. And I think in some ways, Trump followed in those footsteps as well. So he laid a kind of an intellectual groundwork for a later dissident who may not have been quite as intellectual to come along and stoke the flames of, I would say.
Hey, everybody, this isn't a sponsor message. It's an announcement that I have 11 awesome free things to give you that you're going to love, and not one of them is an ebook. For instance, my public speaking secrets that come from my 30-year career, or Dr. Miriam Grossman on how to inoculate your kids against gender ideology, my 10-lesson middle school course on the foundations of liberty. It isn't available for sale anywhere, but if you want it, it's on the freebies page that I'm telling you about now. Here's one you'll like: a simple way to generate $50 per month in perpetuity without work. Now, I'm wording it that way specifically to annoy people who refuse to believe anything. Woods, there's no such thing, they'll say. Oh, but there absolutely is. I earn 3 times that much with it, and I am not joking. Or how about this? Chances are you're right like a dork. I hate to break it to you, but since 90% of the public does, that likely includes you. I'll help you stop, which means you'll stand out in whatever you do. Or how about a case study in which one of my friends who built a 7-figure recipe website shares how she did it? There are more, 11 in total. To get them, all you have to do is say maybe to my awesome School of Life program that everyone raves about. Give it a spin for 30 days for $1, and you can have the 11 freebies in perpetuity. Get them now at 11freebies.com.
Yeah, and it's not to say that Donald Trump is a libertarian or anything like that, or a Ron Paulian, but there's something to the fact that in this most recent campaign of his, I think he had the most Ron Paulian platform that we've seen since 2012, where he advocated at one point, he said that he was actually entertaining the idea of getting rid of the income tax entirely. He is planning on getting rid of taxes on tips, which was Ron Paul's original idea. And then obviously in the 2016 campaign, there was a really big moment where he said that Jeb Bush's brother lied us into the Iraq war. And I think there's a solid case to be had that without Ron Paul, that wouldn't have resonated the same way.
Oh yeah, no question about that. And also it's interesting to see that I think Dr. Paul, who does not really endorse presidential candidates, the last presidential endorsement he gave was Ronald Reagan in 1976. So it's been quite a while. So we don't expect that. But I think he did think that there was hope here, even if it was only rhetorical. That's not exactly nothing, because it gets people thinking in different ways. And that's step one, is to widen that Overton window so that previously unthinkable ideas are now considered. And a great example of that goes back to the 2012 campaign. And again, these moments from the debates are quite memorable in some cases, because for instance, in 2012, Dr. Paul was now being taken a little bit more seriously by the media because he was doing better in the polls. He was building on the recognition he had built up for himself in 2008. So they couldn't just dismiss him the way they had before. Now they had to go on the offensive. And so there was a moment where Chris Wallace in the debate went down a list of agencies that Dr. Paul wanted to abolish. And the purpose of going down this list was to make fun of him, to humiliate him, to suggest that he's obviously ridiculous and there's obviously something the matter with him, so there's no way anybody ought to listen to him. And he went down the FBI, the CIA, and he listed Homeland Security. We didn't have Homeland Security until the 21st century, for heaven's sake. And you might wonder, if we have a Department of so-called defense, why would we need a Department of Homeland Security? If they really have been engaged in defense all this time, why would we even need it? Anyway, so he went down this list, and and people mocked him and scoffed at him. But today, if you went down that list, people in a GOP audience would be applauding. And he had the stones to stand there and take that position when nobody else did. When nobody else was up, he was the only one, when everybody else was making fun of him for it. Now it's a lot easier to take those positions, but he was the guy. He was the guy who all along had been saying, I know what I'm saying to you sounds radical. I know no one talks to you this way, but how are things working for you? Not too well. So maybe it might be time to, in other words, I think that's the same motivation behind voting for Javier Milei in Argentina. Look, we can hardly do worse. Continuing to follow the existing establishment, we can hardly do worse. Why not give an outsider a shot at it? At least listen, because, what's he going to do, a worse job than we have right now? We just had a global financial crisis, under the leadership of these people. We have complete chaos in the Middle East under the leadership of these people. Why is it so unthinkable that we should listen to the guy who says these people are wrong and all screwed up and we need to go back to the fundamentals?
Yeah, and there's something to be said about, even if Donald Trump isn't going to be a libertarian candidate, even if he ends up doing horrible things, as a lot of us anticipated he might, there's something about the fact that electing someone like this, a populist, creates fertile ground for future debates and future conversations. And when I had Angela McCardle on the show to talk about why she was inviting Donald Trump to the Libertarian Party convention, something I had said at the time was, if the only thing we get out of this is that Ross Ulbricht is freed, then it'll be the best thing that the Libertarian Party has ever done, and we should celebrate it. And I think you were right that if there was a fascinating moment in the Trump campaign this last time where I think that the base was much more aligned with us than maybe Trump was. And Trump had advocated for moving the FBI building at one point. But I think if you would have gone to, like, my grandfather, for instance, who watches Fox News and is a huge Trump supporter, and loves everything he says. And if you would have gone to my grandfather and said, well, actually, I think that we should abolish the FBI, we shouldn't move the building, I think him, like most Trump supporters, would have agreed with us on that position, even though Trump would have taken a more moderate stance. So I do think there's something to be said about the cultural impact that an election of Donald Trump has.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that the movement around him is better than he himself is. Because the movement around him is willing to listen to, for example, Tucker Carlson, who has guests on whom I think if Trump had a podcast, he would not have on. And Tucker is talking to the kinds of people whom a Douglas Murray would condemn, as is Joe Rogan. And yet Trump himself is very friendly with Joe Rogan and very friendly with Tucker Carlson. But again, a Donald Trump podcast, maybe Donald Trump Jr. might talk to those people, but his father wouldn't. So he, I think, represents something better and more interesting than he himself is.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. And since you brought up Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan, I recently found a clip of Ron Paul going on, I believe it was Jared Leto's show, and Joe Rogan was there as well. And Joe Rogan actually endorses Ron Paul in this video. And there's this interesting through line with the original Ron Paul campaigns and how it was really the first time we saw this grassroots movement take advantage of decentralized media and the internet, to where, you would have Ron Paul go up on stage in the debates and he would make a great point, but the corporate press would ignore him or criticize him. But then you would have like this delayed reaction where you'd have to wait a while to see just the grassroots support, or you'd have to see, like grassroots events that are being organized around his campaign. But there's this through line where now we have decentralized media to where Dave Smith is able to go on Joe Rogan's platform and is resonating instantly with millions of people. Dave Smith just recently did this debate with Douglas Murray that you alluded to. And immediately after, we're getting feedback that is extremely positive, where in the comments, hundreds of these comments are lambasting Douglas Murray, and you would think that debate after debate after debate, eventually we would get someone who was sophisticated enough to counter our ideas. And debate after debate, it seems like they fall flat and they just resort to ad hominems and straw men. So I wonder what you make of this through line and just the moment we're in and how it relates back to the Ron Paul revolution.
Well, I think where people come down on this Douglas Murray, Dave Smith thing, that is the real defining question, because it says everything I need to know about that person. You know, for example, Dave Rubin just posted a thing about this, and you can already predict what Dave Rubin will say. And it seems like all these people who are part of this whole movement whereby the left left me, it became so extreme, I turned to the right. You know, that's great. And I'm glad we have people who are pointing out how crazy the left is. But when you migrate over into somebody else's political movement, maybe just as a matter of simple manners, you shut the blankety blank up for 5 years and learn things instead of telling them how they should run their movement or what their movement should be about. I mean, it's exactly like an immigrant comes to the U.S. and is going to lecture us on how we ought to organize our society. You know, I'm not that way. I consider that rude. When I visit a foreign country, I feel so. I try my best to speak the language, because I feel like I'm a guest, and it's the least I can do to show that I'm doing my best to be a good guest. You know, like I think a lot of people probably be annoyed if I'm walking down the street and some tongue they don't understand. So I do my best to be a team player with it. It would not occur to me to go there and say, I don't like this law or that law or that law, or you should bring more people in who look like me, or that just seems rude. Well, likewise for people coming over to the right, for them to show up and say, I'm going to tell you who's really on the right, and these other people, I'm going to invent this completely inane, pointless term, woke right, and call them that. No, you know what? You shut up, because you don't know anything. you have no knowledge. You have no standing to tell us how we ought to run things. But Dave Rubin is darn sure that you better listen to Douglas Murray rather than Dave Smith. I mean, what? So, why? Well, so and a lot of these people, not all, but a lot of these people are not that impressive. These I left the left and came over to the right. I mean, I gladly receive them because I like to see people who change their minds. But if they were that smart, they wouldn't have been snookered by the left in the first place. I mean, imagine where your brain would have to be if you said to yourself, the left is where I should be. There's something screwy. Now, every now and then we get a genuine genius who just was screwy and changed his mind, and fine. But what's been happening is these folks, or this intellectual dark web, who are basically, some of them are okay, I guess, but that whole term, I think, reflects that the left wants to deal with, they want to deal with the spectrum only to about here. So as far as they know, the most right-wing people in the world are Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. They can't even conceive of anybody over here. That's how they want it. But I don't care how they want it. So yeah, my view is that this idea that we need to police, or we need to give condescending lectures to a Joe Rogan because he's not having enough people on who are going to repeat to you the exact narrative you've been getting every day of your life since you entered the 4th grade. But you know what? The whole podcasting world is filled with billions of hours of that kind of drivel. If you want it, it's all out there. It's everywhere. The underdog is the alternative view. And if it's wrong, then you get your own podcast and you go out there and you refute it. But you don't show up on Joe Rogan and insult him and most of his listeners with this, well, you can't have a dissident view on World War II because we all know it's this comic book and that's it. I mean, come on, right? I mean, that might have worked in the 1980s because no one had any dissident thoughts in the 1980s. It doesn't work anymore because a lot of people are saying, well, I've now lived through nonstop lies from every official outlet for the past 10 years, 15, I don't know how long it goes. Nonstop lies. So now the natural consequence of that is I'm going to think, what else have I been lied to about? If I've been lied to for about everything in the world over the past 20 years, maybe I was lied to 30 years ago, but I just wasn't paying attention. Or 40 years ago, and I just wasn't paying attention. Or maybe just the interpretation of certain events is off. I'm going to go take a look. There's nothing wrong with that. That is perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with that.
I'd like you to come to the U.S. Virgin Islands with me, and no, not aboard a cruise. For 2 years, I've run the Tom Woods Elite Mastermind, where smart and ambitious people help each other maximize their business success. Forget the vague generalities and the fortune cookie maxims you get in business books. Here, you'll get ideas and strategies designed specifically for you. My own success has been dramatically increased when smart people who knew my specific situation told me, do this specific thing. We meet in person 3 times a year, always in an exciting place, and one of our meetings in the coming year will take place in St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We'll sail around paradise as we help each other reach that next level in our businesses. And a certain magician who fooled Penn and Teller on their TV show will be there to do close-up magic just for our small group. If that sounds awesome, that's because it obviously is. If you want in, head over to woodsmastermind.com and let's talk. woodsmastermind.com.
There have been sort of a series of events over the last couple of years that have really pointed out this fissure that is occurring on the right. And the first one I think of is when Dave Smith actually had Tucker Carlson on his podcast, which was a huge surprise to me at the time. And I clipped this 10-second video where Dave says that Bill Buckley was the villain of the 20th century. And I threw this out there on social media thinking that this would get maybe a couple hundred likes and that it would just be something that my in-group found entertaining, that people who had read, Betrayal of the American Right by Murray Rothbard would like and would comment under. But I woke up the next morning and Meghan McCain had quote tweeted it. Ben Shapiro had covered it on his show. And it was just surprising to see that this was a third rail on the right. And in hindsight, I shouldn't have been so surprised. But since then, there have been multiple events like this in this alternative media we're seeing, or I guess it is the mainstream media now. And, Tucker Carlson went on Rogan's podcast, and he said that he thought the dropping of the atomic bomb was evil. And it got the same response from these same people, the Dave Rubins, the Ben Shapiros, the same people. And then I think it peaked with Daryl Cooper going on Rogan's show. And these people have not been able to recover. And Douglas Murray's debate with Dave Smith was really, I thought, their opportunity to counter it. My perception of Douglas Murray beforehand was that he was a very sophisticated person that some people on the right respect, including myself. I thought that his writings on the immigration problem in Europe was very important, and I listened to his commentary. And yet I was so surprised 30 minutes in with how little he wanted to argue on the actual merits of Dave Smith's points. And it just seems like with every debate that we libertarians have, that Dave Smith goes on these platforms, you would think that eventually someone would be able to counter them. And it's just time after time, it's almost like a Thucydides problem that we're observing on the right, where there's a waxing and waning of power. And they're observing that this new right, that this almost libertarian or populist right is rising. So they're resorting to this self-defeating strategy of lobbing, fallacies at the other side, but it's destroying their own side. And it's really fascinating to see.
And in a way, it's like everybody, they're all revealing themselves all at once, and I suppose that there may be a place in society for people who are, willing to go so far, but not this far. I mean, maybe they play some role. Maybe maybe they're safer to listen to for people on the left, and those people, I don't know, but I just have gotten to the point where I feel like the whole history of the 20th century has got to be revisited, because the world doesn't make sense right now if that story was true. So it really is true. I think what Tucker Carlson says, it really is true. We don't look like the side that won these wars. we look like a defeated people in a lot of ways. Something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. So, and now if you ask about this and you say, there are some profound problems with our society that don't seem to go back just to, Bill Clinton, or Lyndon Johnson or something, but maybe there are more fundamental questions we need to talk about. You get criticized by these people. Oh, look, they're, quote, just asking questions, but we know what that means. The questions are all sinister. Like, shut up. If you're not asking questions, what is wrong with you? I mean, I feel like what they want to stick to is a boomer worldview where, we bow down before statues of Churchill and Reagan, and that's the cool, quote unquote, right wing position. I think the world would look different if these men were what we were told they were. But I forswear to discuss this because I want to stick more to your topic. But I'll just say there's nothing wrong with saying there is a lot of good and valuable history of World War II, like A.J.P. Taylor, who by historians who are respected by everybody until one day everybody told us we weren't allowed to read them anymore. Like this is just dumb. This is dumb. Let people read and talk and take the positions they want to take, and you go ahead and spend your time refuting them if you want to. But standing there wagging your finger at them and hectoring them is a really ineffective strategy.
Yeah, I do want to stay on this topic just for a second, because you had, after this debate, Donald Trump took to social media and promoted Douglas Murray's book.
Yeah.
And you said that actually Donald Trump should be promoting Pat Buchanan's book. And I am currently reading Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. And thankfully, I think that the response to these debates, they have yet to learn the lesson of blowback. And, the response to the debates is that more people are going to search this stuff out, that Daryl Cooper's podcast is going to be extremely popular. People like myself are going to read Pat Buchanan for the first time. But what I found during this debate with Dave and Douglas Murray is that, and in interviews that Douglas Murray has done since, is Doug keeps throwing out the term revisionism as if it's just a given that we're supposed to hate revisionism. He's like, oh, these people just keep doing revisionist history. And I'm wondering if you can just make a case for revisionism from a libertarian perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, although, all of Pat's books are worth reading, the one I had in mind is the much easier to read book, A Republic, Not an Empire, and say, and have Trump say to the public, look, this is how our foreign policy is going to be transitioning now from an empire back to a republic. We're going to see if that can be done, because the empire thing hasn't gotten us anywhere except profoundly in debt and hated all over the world. So we're going to try something different. We're actually going to try something different. He could say that. That would really be nice. Hasn't happened, but it would be nice if he would say that. But in terms of revisionism, I remember growing up and being told that revisionists were stupid left-wing idiots who hate America. There are revisionists who spend their time arguing that the American government has actually done a lot of terrible things. I have no problem with that because I am not the American government. There are so many people who get offended when historians criticize the U.S. government. Look, you and the U.S. government are two different things. This has nothing to do with you personally. Stop taking it personally, all right? I promise you the U.S. government does not think you and it are the same thing. So don't be so unhappy about this. A revisionist is simply saying that maybe we didn't get it right the first time through. What are the chances we got everything right the first time through? Not 100%. Not to mention, a lot of times the stories of involving wars are told by the victors immediately after the cessation of hostilities. And the prejudices and the anger are all still riding really high. And is it likely that under those conditions we're going to get the real story of what happened? I doubt it. So we need to, in other words, now that the dust has settled, now that passions have cooled, let's go back and look again. Not to mention, half the time, we now have access to documentary materials that were not available to the historians immediately afterward. We now have the papers of such and such Secretary of State, which are available at the Library of Congress, or we have the diaries of this person, or we have volumes and volumes of records of one department after another in some other country that we can now look at and see if it tells the same story or not, or maybe it tells a different story. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if this were anything other than re-examining wars, re-examining things that governments love to glorify, everyone would think it was just common sense. Of course, you have to be a revisionist. And it could be that you look at it and you say, well, we have more evidence now, but the additional evidence we have simply bolsters our original instincts. Well, that's fine. At least you looked. And now you understand it even more thoroughly than you did before. So there's no harm in it. But yeah, I mean, anybody who genuinely wants the truth has to support revisionism. And after World War I, when the revisionists look back on that, because remember, the official version of the story was Germany was alone responsible for the outbreak of World War I. I mean, get out of here. Are you kidding me? So the historians went back and looked at that. And these were like Sidney Fay and Harry Elmer Barnes and others. And they argued differently, but they viewed revisionism as an instrument of peacemaking because they believed that revisionism could help overturn misunderstandings between countries and could overturn prejudices that people have. Once we get the truth out there, we understand each other better. It's more likely that we'll be able to treat each other justly in the future. That was how they looked at it, and that's, to me, honorable.
Yeah, I think so too. And specifically with World War I, I mean, my favorite part of the Douglas Murray and Dave Smith debate was when Dave said, without the Treaty of Versailles, we wouldn't have had Hitler. And Douglas Murray says, oh yeah, but then the Germans would have had to win. And Dave responds and says, but they weren't the Nazis. And then Doug goes, no, let me get to my main point. And it was just that small point where Dave acknowledges that the Germans in World War I were not the Nazis. That was so profound to me because Doug doesn't want to contend with that. Doug doesn't want to contend with World War I revisionism that says that maybe Europe would have been intact had the Germans not been defeated and had the monarchy not been absolutely destroyed. And I think the funny part about this is that even Churchill himself was engaging in revisionism after World War I when he blamed the Treaty of Versailles and Woodrow Wilson's entrance into World War I for the defeat of the Germans and for the fact that Britain lost most of its naval power after World War I as well.
I was hoping I could find it, but I'd have to dig around for it a little bit more. Ralph Raico has some great material on this. He was a great historian of Germany.
Rethinking Churchill is his essay that I've read on it.
Right, but he's also got some stuff about World War I, the Germany of World War I, and Germany wouldn't have had to win an overwhelmingly decisive victory. Even if they had just had a modest victory, the result would have been, there would have been some modest adjustments and Europe would have gone on. The regime in Germany was not totalitarian by any possible measure. So in other words, what Dave is saying is a completely legitimate line of argument that has been made by many people, like George Kennan. George Kennan says if we could have gone back to Europe pre-World War I with all those regimes in place, it probably would have been better than the result we had after 2 world wars. That's George Kennan. That's not crazy Dave Smith, whom you're not allowed to listen to. That's the architect of the containment policy, who is held in high regard by basically everyone. So you see, so now you can't even have George Kennan's opinion. This is supposed to be the right wing. You can't even have George Kennan's opinion on international affairs. I mean, who are these creeps? Trying to narrow allowable discussion to that extent.
Yeah, and even Buchanan, he cites Niall Ferguson throughout his book on World War I. And Ferguson is someone that Scott Horton, of course, has debated and destroyed on the Israel-Palestine issue. But getting back to Ron Paul and this conversation about whether Donald Trump should be aligning himself more with Pat Buchanan or Ron Paul, I had put out a tweet saying, Donald Trump could be more like Ron Paul. He could be more like Pat Buchanan, but he is flirting with being like John McCain. And of course, you have sort of popularized this idea that, no matter who you elect, you get John McCain. And we recently got this report from the New York Times saying that there is a civil war within the Trump administration over the issue of Iran. And for months, we thought that, potential bombing of Iran was on the horizon. But it looks like this week, Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, and Pete Hegseth actually interfered with plans that would have involved U.S. strikes in Iran. So I'm wondering what you make of this phenomenon where it seems like we're at the utmost, we have the utmost strategic ambiguity with Trump, but in the opposite direction where it seems like we have more realism, but we're not getting the, war with everyone policy that we got in the past with Biden. But do you think that Trump is actually interested in peace? And what is your perspective of the foreign policy that we currently have with Trump?
I don't know that anybody can give an answer to that. Honestly, I don't know that anybody really knows this guy, because I had an episode of the Tom Woods Show in which I had a debate on the Trump tariffs, and I had Gene Epstein, formerly of Barron's, and I had John Carney of Breitbart. And John Carney said, Trump wants the tariffs because he wants to usher in a tariff-free world. And I said, now that just can't be, John. I mean, he tells us that the word tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language and all that. I mean, that can't be. And he says, look, Tom, I'm on TV all the time with Larry Kudlow, who's Trump's good friend. And Kudlow insists to me, Kudlow, who knows him really well, insists this is what he wants. But yet I have a feeling that if I talk to Peter Navarro, I would get another Trump. So who knows? Who can keep track of it? We can all track down video clips of Trump saying one thing, and then we watch him being on the verge of doing another. And then there's yet a third possibility that maybe it's his crazy negotiating style and he has no intention of doing the thing. I think anybody trying to tell you, I know for sure what's on his mind, I think is not being honest. I think we can't really know. But what we do know is that at least around him, we have at least a few people with some common sense. And the thing is, right around now, look, I know people are unhappy about a lot of things Trump has done. I understand that. I feel the same way. And so they're running victory laps. Aha, you shouldn't have said, you shouldn't have supported him. You should have, okay. But the person who was going to be elected in his place is Kamala Harris, who has no backbone whatsoever, would have been steamrolled by the establishment. Was she going to appoint anybody who was going to issue a word of caution in this kind of situation? A word of caution from the current Democratic Party? Impossible to believe. So at least now we have somebody who put the brakes on, at least temporarily, and I'll take that because that's what we're reduced to. At least we have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're at a moment now where, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are apparently pretty close too. And we have Elon Musk. I don't know if you saw this, but Elon Musk actually commented underneath one of my posts where I recommended that Doge put Ron Paul in charge of an audit team over the Federal Reserve. And Elon Musk commented, good idea.
Yeah.
And so we have someone like that who's apparently pretty close with the administration. So I totally agree. I think it's unprecedented times where, I don't know if we're going to get John McCain because it seems like every other week he switches his position, and maybe that's the strategy. Maybe the strategy is that he convinces everyone that he is an Iran hawk, but behind the scenes, he's negotiating. I had this idea a couple of days ago when talking to one of my friends that it's possible the reason he is appearing to be such an ally with Israel on the home front and,
is so that he can get away with negotiating?
Away with negotiating behind the scenes abroad. So at home, it looks like he's so pro-Israel that he's, deporting anti-Semites or something like that. But behind the scenes, he's actually pretty hard on Israel, it seems. I mean, it's a possibility. Whereas with Biden, we wouldn't have had that possibility at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't rule that as. I think it was Donald Rumsfeld who used the turn of phrase, we're not ruling it in, we're not ruling it out. But I think that scenario can't be ruled out. I mean, I don't know if I can rule it in, but I can't rule it out.
Well, I have two more questions for you before I let you go. The first is going back to Ron Paul. I interviewed him last time, or on my last episode, and I asked him about this moment that we're in, and what he makes of the fact that Elon Musk is engaging with his content and is saying his name. The richest man in the world is saying his name. And I just asked him what he thought of that and what it was about Ron Paul specifically that has made it that he has this lasting moment. And we all know Ron Paul. We know that he's an extremely humble person. And I expected this answer from him. But he said, well, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And it's really the ideas that I'm promoting. It's Leonard Reed's ideas. It's Mises's ideas. It's Rothbard's ideas. But I'm wondering, just with how long you've known him, do you attribute it to anything else? I mean, because I asked him this question and he kind of dodged it because of his humility. But it seems to be that there's actually like something to his character. It's something about his commitment to truth. And, there's a reason why Ron Paul, the person he is, has this lasting movement, but someone like Bernie Sanders, who had an equally sizable movement on the left, has kind of lost all steam. So I'm wondering what you make of that.
Well, it is a matter of humility because we all have access to the ideas of Leonard Reed and all those other people, don't we? And a lot of people have absorbed them, but they haven't turned out to be a Ron Paul, have they? So something else is happening here. And I do think it has something to do with his character. It's that I've called him a stoic in that he, it's not that he doesn't want to see good things happen. I mean, a stoic is happy to see good things happen, but he doesn't fulfill his duties because he thinks they'll lead to good things happening. He fulfills his duties because they're duties and because he believes that they are the right thing to do. And I am sure, no doubt, he is happy to see his partial vindication and have lived to see it. But that wouldn't have changed anything that he was doing, especially since we know he was giving speeches to rooms filled with 35 people for years and years. And that didn't discourage him. He just kept on doing it. And then when suddenly it would be 6,000 people, well, he just kept on doing it and he was given the same speech. And there are very few people, I think, who would have that kind of patience and that kind of dedication and be so immune to influence. Like he can't be bought. He's not seeking fame. I mean, when he ran for president, you could hardly ever hear him saying, as your president, I will, because he just felt funny saying it, or the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He calls it the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. The Ron Paul Liberty Report, he calls it the Liberty Report. So, and that's not fake. That's just who the man is. So I think we've had an opportunity to observe a truly unusual thing, which is somebody who's very smart, who has all the right ideas and has the answers, but is not an ego case and will not sell out. There's nothing. I think the thing that sums it up is something that a lobbyist once said about Ron Paul, why they stopped going to his office. We have nothing to offer him that he wants. That was it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but he went on a Patrick Bet-David show recently, and Patrick Bet-David kept asking him questions about the economy and whether he thought it was going to fail, whether he thought Trump was going to be able to get rid of the Fed, stuff like that. And Patrick Bet-David goes, well, it sounds like you're a real pessimist. And then Ron Paul turns around and he goes, no, I'm the biggest optimist there is because we've made all this progress so far. And meanwhile, he's talking about the prospects of war and the prospects of financial collapse. But he turns around and he says, no, I'm an optimist because people are hearing these ideas for the first time. And it is really, I think, humility.
Yeah, that's it. And that's, as I say, it's at a level I've never really seen before in anybody I've known.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question that I got from David Rand, who is, he runs the weekly show for Human Reaction, which is the program that I'm affiliated with. And he was wondering, so he got into libertarianism in large part because of your book, Meltdown, after the 2008 collapse. And he's wondering if you think, given the current economic situation we're in now, where it looks like these tariffs might cause a collapse, or they might even be, the strategy might be to implement these tariffs so that they can lower interest rates. And it does look like there's potentially an economic calamity on the horizon. He's wondering if you think that there will be a need for another meltdown, another book to explain a future collapse, or just what your take is on the immediate future in terms of the economic status of this country.
Well, I'm going to give an extremely disappointing answer, which is that I don't follow the details of the economy anymore the way I used to in the old days, because that book is from 16 years ago, and I was on top of things. I'm not really anymore. I mean, I am following the news about the tariffs, and I definitely have opinions about that. I think the episode 2633 of the Tom Woods Show, that's tomwoods.com/2633, is called this is like the one that is going to get me in trouble with almost everybody. No one wants this, but I got to be me. So it's called, Is China Guilty as Charged? And I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'll just say that what you're going to learn in there is not exactly what you would see, on some Steve Bannon podcast. We'll put it that way. Yeah. So I think it's, the tariffs alone, leaving the Fed even out of it, the tariffs alone could, of course, cause a lot of dislocation for an extended period of time. That would be a completely different story from the story in Meltdown. Now, if as you say, if the aim is, if pushing for lower interest rates is one of the subsidiary steps of an overarching economic policy that involves tariffs, and then it's somewhere down the line they want to push for lower interest rates, well, then if we had honest interest rates, it would be interesting to see which industries, which firms can make it in a real economy, and which ones are just being propped up. But right now, we don't know what those are. And if you push rates lower, we'll get more confusion about which things really deserve to stay going and are sustainable, and which ones are part of a fake economy. We just won't know. But the longer you keep a fake economy going, the worse it is when the crash ultimately comes. I mean, that was the lesson from 2008, because in 2001 we had a modest recession with the 2001 with the dot-com bubble bursting. But as Ron Paul said at the time on the floor of the House, they're inflating a real estate bubble to take its place instead of just letting things settle out. So this was the first recession in history in which housing starts actually went up. Normally, housing starts go down. It's a recession. People aren't buying houses, but it went up. So there's something is weird. So in other words, instead of letting economic activity resolve itself into sustainable forms, instead it stayed unsustainable for another 7 years. And this particular part of the economy, housing, had all kinds of stimulus to it, not just from the Fed, but all kinds of federal policies that I talk about in Meltdown. And so if in 2001 we had allowed things to be normal and we had allowed the economy to give off a few red lights, maybe we could have built again from a solid foundation. But all the lights turned green. And so everybody did the wrong thing for 7 years. And then when it all came undone, it was a disaster. Now, at the same time, I'm not a perma bear who says the economy is always on the verge of collapse. And I have never been that person. I don't hold that opinion. I know people I respect deeply held that opinion during one of the great bull markets of all time, and they left a huge amount of money on the table. So I'm not giving investment advice here. I'm just talking about the fundamentals, the overall health of the economy. I'm not timing anything. I'm just saying that the more the economy is based on real things, on real consumer demand that is sustainable, that is based on real resources that have been saved and allocated for this purpose, the more it's based on that, the healthier it's going to be. And the less it's based on that, the more fake and unhealthy it'll be.
Yeah, well, the idea that the recession is the cure to the problem is certainly another issue where Trump should be listening to people like Ron Paul as opposed to establishment voices. But thank you so much for joining me. If you want to just pitch your website and where people can find you, that'd be awesome.
Well, in particular, I mean, the Tom Woods Show you can find anywhere, but I have, and these are for adults and for like high school students. I have 2 U.S. history courses taught by me and by a couple of my reliable colleagues, and you used to have to pay to get them, and you don't anymore. You can just get them for free, and you can get them at woodshistory.com. And woodshistory.com is going to make you very happy because it is going to, it is the response to your social studies teacher, your 11th grade teacher, whatever educational malpractice you may have suffered, the cure is waiting at woodshistory.com. And as I say, you used to have to pay to get access to these courses. You do not anymore. You can have them at woodshistory.com.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to link that in the description. But thank you so much for joining me. It really meant a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.